What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9 coming to you with another video. This time we have some classic gameplay with Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader. So we have Luke Skywalker, faithful friend here, who can give a shield token. I'm running just the basic Administrator's Tower, and my opponent is using Command Vader. So this is, in a sense, the starter deck matchup, Cunning Luke versus Command Vader, but we are not using the starter decks. We have some customized builds. So my opponent's running the Energy Conversion Lab. I am running just the Administrator's Tower since the Cunning base has not been previewed as of this video, though I believe it's going to be previewed early next week based on how the votes seem to be going on the Twitter poll for what type of card we want to see first. And we're going to have a set of 3 games here. So game 1, thorrk brings out Colonel Yularen, a pretty strong starting unit, 2-cost 2/3 Imperial Official. I'm going to play C3PO, guessing 2, and I missed the draw there. Not a 2-cost copy of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I resource up, and we'll see how this continues. Okay, so going into the second round, thorrk has the initiative. And so generally this is a matchup where Luke and Vader, I think, are kind of a classic matchup, in the lore, and also very interesting heroes in the game to have facing off because their abilities kind of mutually counter each other. And by that, what I mean is, Luke has the shield and Vader has the damage that can potentially ping off the shield. And we will see which one prevails here. So I have my C3PO against my opponent's Colonel Yularen. One thing I could do here is I could give C3PO Luke's lightsaber and defeat Yularen with it. Another thing that I could do here is just go for the base and then play out a shielded restored arc, or maybe play the rogue operative. I end up swinging for the base, guessing 2 here, don't see a 2. And my opponent plays a resupply, not what I most want to see. It's going to ramp Vader into deploying earlier. So with one piece of ramp, Vader deploys with one piece of ramp. Vader deploys before Luke, which is very relevant in this matchup. I end up deploying the restored arc and putting a shield on it. I draw an extra copy of C3PO and resource that. Not really fond of the ground arena here. My opponent can just attack with Colonel Yularen to defeat C3PO, but actually we see the Energy Conversion Lab being used, and a Super Laser Technician shows up, 3-cost 2/1, ambushes C3PO and defeats him, and then becomes a readied resource. So my opponent now has 3 resources ready. Now I'll play the Rogue Operative from hand. Rogue Operative is a 3-cost 2/4 with Saboteur and Raid 2. So is able to defeat that Colonel Yularen even on the defense. Saboteur, ignoring Sentinel and defeating the defender's shields doesn't do a ton. Also, my opponent playing that Super Laser Technician healed him, thanks to Colonel Yularen allowing you to repair 1 damage from your base when you deploy a command unit. My shielded restored arc comes in for 2 damage to the base. And my opponent plays another resupply. So this is the dreaded turn 3 Vader combo. Very, very negative, very negative development for me. I shield my rogue operative. My opponent deploys Vader. I take the initiative, and my opponent is going to attack into the rogue operative using Vader's ping. So Vader is a 5/8 and on attack can deal 2 damage. Uses that 2 damage to destroy the shield. Then the normal attack defeats the rogue operative, and Vader takes 2. Unfortunately, this means out of range of a card like Takedown, but I don't have a takedown anyway, so kind of a tough spot for me, to be honest. The restored arc throws 2 more damage on the pile and repairs my base for 1. My hand isn't really offering me many options. The best thing I have here is probably a Vanquish for whatever the strongest unit my opponent plays is, but we actually see a Fallen Lightsaber giving Vader +3/+3, and on attack deal 1 damage to each ground unit the defending player controls. This is a really big buff for Vader and is going to make him even more of a problem. In particular, I have a copy of Han Solo in hand, but I'm not going to be able to get Han Solo now. It's not going to happen. I don't know if I take the initiative or pass here. I was sort of hoping my opponent would play a larger unit, maybe an ETST or something, and I could play Vanquish and destroy it. But that was not to be this game. and 5 resources there for the opponent. Tough situation for me. I have a much weaker board. I am winning the Space Arena right now, but I'm not sure how long that's going to be the case. I passed there in the hopes of the opponent playing a unit that I could then counter, but with my Vanquish, but the opponent just takes the initiative, meaning that I lose my chance to play something that turn. Not great. So my hope this turn is to pass so that Vader has attacked. Then I will deploy Luke and Obi-Wan, and hopefully I'll be able to use that to try and stabilize the situation. But the beginning here is looking very unfavorable for me, and my opponent has the initiative. I arguably should have just taken the initiative instead of trying to be tricky with that Vanquish. That would allow me to play out Obi-Wan immediately, which would put me in a better spot. An Interceptor destroys my restored arc. Not at all what I want to see here. Now I am in a position where I actually pass again. My hope is that my opponent will attack with Vader. After Vader has attacked, I can bring out Luke and then Obi-Wan and maybe get some results. But not in a great spot here. 2 damage there. I pass again. I want to see Vader attack because once Vader attacks, that big attack is not going to be available to hit my other stuff. Arguably, I should just play Obi-Wan. I think really what I should have done is taken initiative on the previous turn and then played Obi-Wan. But Vader hits my base for 8. I am in desperate straits here, but I can deploy Luke this turn and then send in Obi-Wan. However, as soon as I deploy Luke, my opponent, who has 9 resources at this point, even after playing that interceptor, has the resources for an overwhelming barrage, which allows Vader to defeat Luke immediately. So Luke doesn't get any value. And then I am going to deploy Obi-Wan, but at this point the game is basically over. Obi-Wan, all he's going to do is block like one attack from Vader, and I don't really have a way to come back. But maybe clearing Vader with Han is going to allow me to get the advantage if and when Vader attacks Obi-Wan and is damaged from that. Um, but even then, I'm not sure I'd be able to win with the other units still there to push damage through. And it doesn't even matter because my opponent plays the new Devastator. I don't think Devastator is that good a card, but the 10 damage there defeats Obi-Wan. And at this point, I think I just concede the game. It's over. It's not. There's no coming back from that. So that was a tough game for me. Not one that went well. Not one that went well at all. The turn 3 Vader combo. Uh, and then the overwhelming barrage to defeat Luke and the Devastator there really caused me some problems. I could have put myself in a better spot if I had if I had used. I could have put myself in a better spot if I had taken the initiative rather than hoping for a vigilance and then played Obi-Wan before my opponent defeated the restored arc, as that would allow me to potentially get some value from Obi-Wan's effect on death. That would have put me in, I think, a better position. But it's possible. I mean, maybe he had the barrage then and could have just barraged and killed the arc and then Obi-Wan at the same time, in which case I would not be in a meaningfully very much better position, except that I guess I could get Luke on the board and then get him defeated very fast. Not really very favorable. So we're kind of discussing Devastator here. I currently think Relentless is better than Devastator because Relentless counters its own counters and Devastator doesn't, and they have a similar role of being a like endgame victory unit. So I think I'm going to highlight the card here maybe. Devastator it's a 10 cost 10/10 with Sentinel and Overwhelm, and when it's played, you may deal damage to a unit equal to the number of resources you control. So that might well be 10 damage. So it's a super unit. Deploying it, you can defeat almost anything. You can defeat, Darth Vader. You can defeat Luke. Maybe if they have a shield, it's a different story. But like baseline, this will basically defeat anything in the game when you play it. And then it's also a Sentinel with Overwhelm in the Space Arena, so it will give you control there. By comparison, Relentless is, I believe, 8/8, and doesn't have Sentinel, doesn't have Overwhelm, doesn't kill something when played, but what it does do is it blocks the first event your opponent plays every turn. And because of that, events that would be actually very negative if you have actually very negative with the larger ship are more effectively stopped by Relentless. So for instance, if someone plays Change of Heart, if someone plays Change of Heart and they take control of your ship, this can actually be catastrophically bad with Devastator. And I had a game earlier where my opponent waylaid, actually in my previous video here, my opponent waylaid Devastator, and I thought, maybe this is good. Maybe I don't want to replay it because of how crushing a Change of Heart could be on it. Whereas on the other side of things, Change of Heart basically doesn't work against Relentless almost at all because if they would have to play a first event, which would be wasted first, and then you can attack with Relentless, and then they can use Change of Heart to take control of it, but only after it's exhausted, making the impact of that card much lower. So interesting situation there. So we're going to go into round two, and hopefully I can do a little better than the catastrophic round one there. This time I do have the initiative, which is a little bit of a help. Looks like my first turn play this game is going to be the Restored Arc, and then I'm going to follow that up probably with Ezra Bridger. So I also do have a copy of Entrenched, which can potentially be used to buff up one of my units, probably in the ground arena to fight with my opponent's units and gain control of that arena. And I have a takedown, which is some solid removal. As a very basic game plan, if I hit Vader with Ezra and then use takedown, that will defeat Vader. So we'll see whether or not I'm able to put that into play. And my opponent making a resourcing decision here. While I am using, I have a pretty straightforward plan for the first two turns. Turn one, Restored Arc, turn Ezra probably. And so indeed, we're going to see the Restored Arc coming out turn one. My opponent plays, I think, Admiral Ozzel here. Yep, Admiral Ozzel, and I take the initiative, drawing two cards, and I see a Han Solo and a Luke's lightsaber. So based on this, I think I end up resourcing the Entrenched, but I'm not sure. I want to keep Han Solo because he has a really big impact in this matchup if you can get into the later game. I play out Ezra, 3 cost, 3/4. And when this unit completes an attack, look at the top card of your deck. You may play it, discard it, or leave it on top of your deck. Now, because it's when this unit completes an attack, you do have to have Ezra actually survive to make use of this ability, unlike an on-attack ability, which you get even if you die in the attack. However, my opponent immediately plays an open fire, defeating Ezra. I send the Restored Arc in for 2 damage on the base, and my opponent is going to, I believe, attack with Ozzel here for 2 damage to my own base. Then I will take the initiative. Arguably, I'm not entirely sure. It might be better to just take the initiative here for my opponent because if he has an Imperial Interceptor, he can then play it before my Restored Arc has a chance to do anything this turn. Not sure. I don't think he has it anyway, so it's not incredibly relevant. I play a Wing Leader. 3 cost, 2/1. When played, give 2 experience tokens to another friendly rebel unit. Excellent unit. This is one of the best units in the game, in my opinion. It can often get a huge amount of value from playing a wing leader and buffing your turn 1 play, which is exactly what's happening here, even though I ended up playing it on turn 3 instead of turn 2. My opponent plays out an Emperor's Royal Guard, 3 cost, 3/4. It does have Sentinel because there is an Imperial official in play. I shield my Wing Leader so Vader's ping can't remove it immediately. We then see Vader's ping being used anyway to knock the shield off. This is kind of what I meant with respect to Vader and Luke mutually countering each other. I then hit the enemy base for 4 with my buffed Restored Arc, healing 1 damage from my own base with Restore 1. Ozzel hits my base for 2, and I am going to take the initiative. So thus far, I'm kind of intentionally avoiding putting stuff in the ground arena right now because if my opponent has a super laser technician, I do not want him to be able to ramp up. My hope is that by avoiding the ground arena a bit, I'm going to be able to avoid my opponent getting value from a super laser technician, and I will be able to block ramp at least until I play Luke. And then if he uses a super laser technician against Luke, I can play Luke's lightsaber to heal the damage, shield up, get ready for Vader, who I can potentially defeat with a surprise strike. I lead off by hitting the base for 4 with the buffed Restored Arc, also repairing 1 damage to my own base. This allows me to get the maximum value if he uses Admiral Ozzel. To deploy a unit readied, I will be able to get more value by readying my Restored Arc than I would with the Wing Leader. My opponent plays Yularen. I swing for 2 more damage with the Wing Leader. Yularen heals my opponent's base for 1. The Ozzel swings in here for 2 damage to my own base. I'm going to play my takedown to defeat the Emperor's Royal Guard. So not only does this defeat a unit with 5 or less remaining HP, not only does this clear a unit before it attacks, that also means my opponent no longer has a Sentinel, which is going to be advantageous for my potential plan to get rid of Vader. He ends up playing Vader's lightsaber on Ozzel. This is something I'm a little scared of because it does mean now that if my opponent has an overwhelming barrage, he will be able to defeat Luke with it as soon as I deploy him. We then also see Vader's ability being used to defeat a wing leader. I get an easy resourcing decision this turn because I draw a redundant copy of Luke's lightsaber. Once again, I'm going to lead off with the restored arc attacking the enemy base because that's some good value that I have on the table. And if my opponent has a maximum firepower or something to remove it, it is not going to work. Although arguably that's actually a mistake because if my opponent had a maximum firepower, he would probably want to use it on Luke instead. So it might have been good for me to do something that would allow him to have the opportunity to maximum firepower on the restored arc, which I would rather lose than Luke. I didn't end up playing it like that though, and I don't really have another play that would be good because I don't have like Obi-Wan would be pretty cool here, but I don't own, I just have this rogue operative who could easily be defeated by the buffed Ozzel. I do end up deploying Luke. My opponent thinking about what to do here. So I see three resources. I'm like, oh man, is that going to be the super laser technician coming in to allow Vader to deploy this turn? I feel like I have a good counter prepared for that with Luke's lightsaber on Luke. Um, what I don't want to see here is a snowtrooper lieutenant or I don't want to see Luke just immediately dying to snowtrooper lieutenant, overwhelming barrage, or maximum firepower. It was kind of risky to deploy Luke at all in this situation because there are several cards that would immediately counter him. But under the circumstances, I feel like I kind of have to because my only other play is very bad. The Rogue Operative is the only other real thing that I can play here. So I'd rather just bring out Luke. 7 defense is enough to weather a lot of basic stuff. The Oswald can only hit him for 5, so we'll see how exactly it goes here. But I'm hoping he doesn't have an immediate kill for Luke. He ends up deploying a fallen lightsaber onto Ozzel as well. So Ozzel is now really buffed, actually up to 8 attack. Luckily for me, I throw on Luke's lightsaber, which will now shield Luke, meaning that Ozzel can no longer defeat him in one hit. And this actually also means that I can win the game with my next action, depending on what happens here, because I can surprise strike the base for 10 with Luke and just close out the game immediately. If my opponent doesn't deploy a sentinel here, and actually my opponent just concedes the game, I think with that shield token, he was no longer able to remove Luke. And as a result of that, I would have been able to get the win. And so that's going to be, we're now 1-1, and we're going to go to game 3 in the Vader versus Luke matchup here. So in the first game, I think seeing 3 ramp components is pretty lucky. But this game, I think it turned out that my opponent, I think, had 0 ramp components. I discussed this after the game, and he didn't have the super laser technician that I was so afraid of and trying to play around. He just didn't see any ramp that game, which is unlucky for him. With Vader Command, I typically think, assuming that you're playing 3 resupplies, 3 super laser technicians, which in my opinion you probably should be, I think that seeing 1 piece of ramp before Vader deploys is normal. Seeing 2 is lucky, seeing 3 is super lucky, seeing 0 is unlucky. So in the first game, the 3 ramp opening for the turn 3 Vader, I would consider that super lucky for him. But this time we had 0 ramp, and I consider that unlucky for him. So ended up, while the first game was pretty crazy for him, the second game ended up okay for me. And I will also say the triple ramp is not unbeatable. I actually, the first time I saw it, actually also in a game with thorrk, I was playing Aggression Luke, and I ended up getting the win in that game, believe it or not. So if you think the triple ramp turn 3 Vader is like, crazy and unbeatable, it is actually beatable, and I have beaten it. Although in that first game today, I certainly did not. I was beaten pretty bad. So this time, my opening play is going to be R2D2, put a shield on him. Then I'm probably going to play either Ezra or Wing Leader, depending. My opponent leads off with Colonel Yularen, pretty good start. I lead off with R2D2. Look at my top card. It is so R2D2, when played or on attack, you can look at your top card and then choose to leave it on top or send it to the bottom. I see a fleet lieutenant, which I want to keep. because I'm going to be able to Fleet Lieutenant my R2 into my opponent's Colonel Yularen and get the kill. My hope here is that I'm going to get the Fleet Lieutenant buffed with Wing Leader, taking him up to Strength 5, and then use Surprise Strike to defeat Vader in one shot. So I'm often, in these situations, I'm often thinking, like, how am I going to counter, like, such and such big play from my opponent? And so I'm already kind of making a plan of, like, how I want to deal with Vader. My opponent leads off with Yularen attacking into R2 and removing his shield. I'm then going to Fleet Lieutenant R2 into Yularen to secure the kill. I could play the Wing Leader this turn to buff R2, but my plan is to buff the Fleet Lieutenant instead to be in position to get Vader. Additionally, the Wing Leader can easily be removed by Vader's ping, so I want to save playing it for a turn when I am going to be able to potentially shield him with Luke to allow him to survive longer. Sometimes in this matchup, you end up wanting to play Wing Leader on turn 3 instead of turn 2 for that reason. Although if the opponent has already played such that they aren't going to have access to Vader's ping, for instance, if my opponent had spent 2 resources on Colonel Yularen, who does not have the villainous aspect, or had spent all 3 resources, as he did now, on an Imperial Royal Guard, that would be an opportunity for me to play the Wing Leader, knowing that Vader's ping can't be used this turn. So I draw into another Fleet Lieutenant. And in this situation, I'm like, I also see Han Solo. And so I'm thinking, I'm going to resource my Leia Organa. She is very useful for countering Vader in some ways, but I want to my Fleet Lieutenant to trade with the Royal Guard. And then I'm going to try and shield this Fleet Lieutenant using Luke's ability in order to get him into position so that I can do that Wing Leader plus Surprise Strike play for dealing with my opponent's Vader. That's still really what I'm thinking about at this point. But my opponent is going to throw a bit of a wrench in the works there with an open fire, defeating my Fleet Lieutenant. And so R2-D2 swings into the enemy base, 1 damage. Look at my top card. It's Han Solo. I'm going to send Han Solo to the bottom of the deck, and it's now going to be my opponent's turn. thorrk looking at the top card there, or looking at the top 2 cards, trying to figure out what to resource. I still haven't seen any ramp from my opponent, which I'm quite happy about. A Super Laser Technician here would be high value because it could actually kill R2 as well as ramping my opponent. But it's actually a 2 resource play instead. Probably not going to be a Super Laser Technician this turn. We see a seasoned Shore Trooper entering the field. I play the Wing Leader, buffing R2. So R2 can now attack and defeat that Shore Trooper, which would be a pretty favorable thing. The Shore Trooper becomes a 4-2, or a 4-3 when my opponent has 6 resources, which he currently does not. But we see the Fallen Lightsaber giving the Seasoned Shore Trooper +3/+3, now more than a match for R2. I use Luke's ability to shield the Wing Leader, and I'm going to have R2 attack into the enemy base, deal 3 damage. Look at my top card, it's Kanan. I think I end up leaving that on top. Arguably, I should have sent that to the bottom, but it's hard to say. Um, this turn, I see another Han, and I want to keep both of those because those are really high value in this matchup. And there's also a situation where Han and Emperor Palpatine mutually counter each other. So you might want to have more than one so that if the opponent, like let's say I play Han, my opponent plays Emperor Palpatine, then I could play Han again to trade with Palpatine, and hopefully they don't have a second Palpatine. So I'm keeping multiple copies of that unit in play for this reason. And we are seeing thorrk with the initiative this turn though. So let's see what he ends up doing. One thing that he could do is attack and defeat my R2-D2. If he doesn't do that, I can potentially take out the Shore Trooper using Surprise Strike. I could also potentially use Leia to exhaust the Shore Trooper, then deploy Luke, shield R2, and then use the Surprise Strike. But the problem with that is that if my opponent has Overwhelming Barrage, he'll be able to defeat Luke immediately, since the Shore Trooper is actually Strength 7 right now because my opponent now has 6 or more resources. So so that's 4 + 3 for the lightsaber. So the it's a dangerous situation for me to deploy Luke here. I would like to deploy Luke so that I could shield R2 before attacking into the Shore Trooper with Surprise Strike, but under the circumstances, I think it's actually unsafe. And what I have to do is just immediately use the Surprise Strike. So I kind of balk at it. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, no, maybe I wanted to play Luke. Then I remember Overwhelming Barrage will just take me out. I end up going for the Surprise Strike instead. And so that's a trade. I see a Rogue Operative on top of my deck. I'm not so thrilled with that. I end up sending that to the bottom. And So that's going to be a solid hit against the solid hit into the shore trooper. So R2 has one base attack, but +3 from surprise strike and +2 from the experience means that it's hitting for strength 6 and is enough to remove that buffed shore trooper in one go. I'm quite happy about that because I was worried that my opponent was going to have the overwhelming barrage waiting for Luke, and now I'm going to be able to deploy hopefully without that. My opponent also has not ramped this turn, so I don't think we're seeing Vader this turn. I could potentially deploy Leia. I could potentially deploy Leia at this point, ready a resource, use Luke's ability to shield Leia, and just have another body on the field. But I actually think that's quite bad because if I do that, then I won't have her available if my opponent like plays resupply now. Or if I play Leia and my opponent ambushes the super laser technician in, then we're gonna see Vader come out this turn, and I won't have the Leia Organa Defiant Princess available in hand to potentially counter. So I'm not going to do that, and instead I think I just end up deploying Luke here. I think my opponent, I'm not sure if he passed or took the initiative here. I think he might just take the initiative here. Yeah, he takes the initiative here, which to me signals that he probably does have that overwhelming barrage, which I ended up being able to avoid, something that I'm quite happy about. So I'm going to swing in for 2 damage with Wing Leader, deploy Luke. Luke will attack the base for 4 and put a second shield token on the Wing Leader. Draw a card, or draw 2 rather. So this turn I have Han. So I think about resourcing Han, but I'm like, no, having the second Han is too valuable. I'm gonna resource I think I end up resourcing Restored Arc here, even though I really like that card. It's kind of small for this point in the game, and I want to retain the Surprise Strike, the Leia, and Han. So now I have Han in a position to potentially take down my opponent's Vader once Vader deploys. My thinking for this turn is if my opponent deploys Vader, I could use I could use Leia to immediately exhaust Vader. There's some advantage to that, but I think what I actually want to do is have Luke attack into Vader, putting him in position to be removed by Han, and then also putting a third shield on my wing leader. So my opponent indeed deploys Vader. Unfortunately, Surprise Strike isn't enough to allow Luke to defeat Vader in one attack, so I have Luke attack into Vader normally, thus putting Vader into range to be defeated by Han, even if my opponent were to play the Overwhelming Barrage getting +2, or were to play a Fallen Lightsaber for +3. Han's 6 attack would still be enough to defeat him in one shot. So in this situation, I'm feeling pretty good about that play. Luke, of course, will be defeated here pretty easily, so my opponent could, if he plays Vader's lightsaber, the damage will defeat Luke. If he just attacks the base with Vader, the damage will defeat Luke. Overwhelming Barrage defeats Luke. Open Fire defeats Luke. Luke is not going to stay in play very long. I don't have his lightsabers. There's no advantage there. My opponent attacks the base for 5 with Vader and uses the on attack. You may deal 2 damage to a unit, so that 2 damage defeats Luke. Luke defeated 15 to 18. Han Solo arrives to defeat the Emperor, or to defeat Vader. So Han is a 6/6 with ambush, and while attacking, this unit does combat damage before the defender. So he applies his 6 damage, defeats Vader, and Vader doesn't hit back. So Han is still a 6/6 and will be difficult to remove. And that's a happy situation for me. And yeah, so now I have a pretty strong board here. I have that other Han waiting in case my opponent removes this Han with something like Emperor Palpatine or potentially even potentially even some combination of other cards. He could play out a seasoned shore trooper and then use maximum fire, or and then use overwhelming barrage, for instance. That would be 6 damage. Instead, my opponent plays an Imperial Interceptor, dealing 3 damage to my wing leader, which is blocked by a shield. And I then have the wing leader attack and defeat the Imperial Interceptor, losing another shield, but it still has a third shield. So the bonus shields from Luke, keeping that humble wing leader in the game here. And my opponent is then going to take the initiative. And now both sides up to 8 resources, and we indeed see Emperor Palpatine. So Emperor Palpatine's a 6/6 with Overwhelm, and when deployed, he deals up to 6 damage, spread as you like among enemy units, does all 6 to defeat Han. And there's that second copy of Han coming in for 6 damage to defeat Emperor Palpatine right back. So I'm happy that I hung on to both copies of Han here. It allowed me to get huge value by defeating my opponent's Emperor Palpatine. My opponent takes the initiative, and because I resourced, I can now put a shield on Han, and this shield on Han is huge because now another Emperor Palpatine will not defeat Han, nor would a bombardment. And Han is now going to be quite difficult for my opponent to remove, which is something that I consider very favorable. And at this point, both my units are shielded, so I'm quite protected from enemy removal here. And I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty good spot. But we're gonna see how this goes. Um, the downside to red to aggression commands removal is that it's all damage based. We don't have any cards like Vanquish, so I have a Vanquish in hand. If my opponent had a Vanquish, he could just defeat Han even through the shield, but it's not what we're seeing here. A Emperor's Royal Guard gets deployed here. I'm just going to have Han hit the enemy base directly. So my goal here is to set things up for a quick kill next turn with that surprise strike. I ideally want to be in a position where I can just play surprise strike and win the game immediately. My opponent uses Vader's ability, one damage to my base, one damage to Han, removing the shield. We do see 5 resources there, so we could see an overwhelming barrage, but it wouldn't be for lethal since Han has 6 life. I'm going to play Obi-Wan, who is another powerful unit, and I can surprise strike him as well. And my opponent just concedes the game at this point. So that is a victory for Luke and ends up going 2-1 in this matchup. So fairly solid games. I was lucky in the later two that my opponent did not have any ramp. In the first game, I was kind of mentioning earlier, 0 ramp unlucky, 1 ramp default, 2 ramp before Vader lucky, 3 ramp before Vader super lucky. And so the first game we had what I would consider the super lucky 3 ramp before Vader, but then in the next two we had 0 ramp before Vader, and my opponent and I were discussing this, and I think we were both of the opinion that it would probably be better to have 1 ramp in each game rather than 3 in the first one and 0 in the other two. So a bit of good fortune there for me when it came to my opponent's ramping. I had some solid counters. The double Han there to counter the Emperor worked pretty well. And yeah, so that's an updated version of the classic core set or the classic two-player starter matchup with a updated version of Luke Cunning versus an updated version of Vader Command. And ultimately, Luke Cunning was able to get the win. I will link the Luke Cunning deck list that I used for this game in the description below. I will also link the previous video where I was able to actually a video from a few days ago where I was actually able to beat the turn 3 Vader combo. And then I will also link to my introductory article over at the Fifth Trooper blog, which is a good resource if you're newer to the game and trying to figure out the basics, or if maybe you know someone who is and want to show them that. That article I think is maybe going to be a helpful resource. Okay, so that's going to do it for that one, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I'll catch you guys later.